Number 10. The Flammenwerfer, 41. Germany's walking wall of fire. Let's begin here. Not with a bomb or a battleship, but with a single soldier standing at the entrance of a fortified position, carrying fire on his back. The German Flammenwerfer 41, introduced in 1941, was a refinement of the heavier Flammenwerfer 35, which had weighed 35.8 kilograms and proved too cumbersome for sustained combat. The new model weighed 28.7 kilograms when fully loaded. It used a tar and petrol mixture called Flammel 19, propelled by nitrogen, ignited by a hydrogen torch at the muzzle. Its effective range was 32 meters. The temperature of its flame exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius. Those numbers don't capture what it actually meant to face one. In the fighting along the Gustav Line in Italy in 1944, Allied infantry encountered German flamethrower operators defending fortified hillside positions south of Monte Cassino. Veterans described not the heat or sound as the defining experience. It was the smell. Burning fuel, burning earth, burning men. A paralysis took hold that conventional gunfire had never produced. You could take cover from bullets. You could not take cover from a liquid that clung to surfaces and kept burning through water, soil, through anything it touched. The German military deployed flamethrower operators specifically at fortified positions, bunkers, pillboxes, caves, because those were the places the flame reached most effectively. The appearance of a Flammenwerfer operator outside a defended entrance routinely achieved what artillery bombardment had failed to accomplish: immediate, total surrender. What made the weapon particularly disturbing was the position it placed its own operators in. Carrying pressurized flammable liquid into combat made them the highest priority target on any battlefield. The life expectancy of a Flammenwerfer operator in active combat was measured not in campaigns, but in minutes. The weapon required its user to accept near certain death in exchange for delivering fear, and armies kept finding men willing to carry it. Number 9. The MG-42, the machine gun that changed the sound of war. In the spring of 1942, Soviet soldiers on the Eastern Front began submitting reports that puzzled their commanding officers. The German machine gun they were encountering didn't sound like a machine gun. It produced a single, continuous tearing shriek rather than the distinct rhythm of individual shots. Allied soldiers encountering it later in North Africa described exactly the same thing. That sound was the MG-42. The Maschinengewehr 42 fired at a cyclic rate of approximately 1,200 rounds per minute. The American M1919 Browning fired at 400 to 600. The British Bren at roughly 500. The MG-42 fired so fast the human ear could not separate individual shots, producing a continuous mechanical tearing sound that became one of the most feared audio signatures of the entire war. Military psychologists later identified it as a specific trigger for acute anxiety responses in soldiers who had been exposed to it, even days after an engagement. Designed by Dr. Werner Gruner at Metall- und Lackierwarenfabrik Johannes Grossfuss, AG in Döbeln, a company that had never previously built weapons, specializing instead in pressed steel components and sheet metal lanterns. The MG-42 used a recoil-operated roller locking mechanism that delivered its exceptional rate of fire while remaining reliable in the mud, sand, and cold that destroyed most contemporary weapons. Its barrel could be changed by a trained crew in under 10 seconds, critical given that the rate of fire caused overheating within 2 minutes of sustained firing. West Germany's Bundeswehr adopted a modified version after the war, the MG3, which remains in active service in militaries worldwide today. The weapon that tore through Allied infantry from the Eastern Front to the beaches of Normandy is, in modernized form, still being manufactured more than 80 years later. the sound of tearing fabric still means the same thing it meant in 1942. Number 8. The Katyusha rocket, the organ that played only one note. On July 14th, 1941, a battery of 7 experimental Soviet rocket launchers under the command of Captain Ivan Flerov opened fire on German troop concentrations near Rudnya and at the Orsha railway junction in western Russia. The weapons were so new, their existence was a classified state secret, guarded by NKVD personnel. The rockets were inaccurate by any conventional artillery standard. The launcher was a simple rack of rails on the bed of a truck. None of that mattered. The BM-13 Katyusha, named informally after a popular wartime song, fired 132mm rockets in salvos of up to 16 projectiles simultaneously. A single battery of 4 launchers could deliver 64 rockets in under 10 seconds, saturating several acres before any target could react. The sound in flight, a screaming wail from the stabilizing fins, became one of the most psychologically destabilizing sounds in modern warfare. German soldiers called it Stalin's organ. Soviet troops called it Katyusha. Everyone who heard it recognized it immediately. The Katyusha terrified differently from the MG-42. The machine gun implied precision. It would find you specifically. The Katyusha implied inevitability. The rockets covered such a wide area so fast that no individual action, no tactical skill, no amount of personal courage could improve your odds. You were either outside the impact zone or you weren't. The distinction was entirely random. Wehrmacht prisoner interrogation reports through 1942 and 1943 consistently identified the Katyusha as among the most demoralizing weapons on the Eastern Front. Not for its accuracy, which was modest, but because it removed the soldier's most fundamental defense, the belief that alertness and skill could keep you alive. Number 7. The U-boat, the war beneath the surface. Between September 1939 and May 1945, German U-boats sank approximately 3,500 Allied merchant ships and killed an estimated 72,200 Allied naval and merchant seamen. Men whose job was not combat but the transportation of food, fuel, and ammunition across the Atlantic. The U-boat campaign was a systematic attempt to starve Britain into submission by severing its supply lines. At its peak in 1942, U-boats were sinking ships faster than Allied yards could build replacements. What made the U-boat uniquely feared was the nature of the death it delivered. Merchant vessels had no meaningful defense. A torpedo strike gave the crew minutes before the ship went under. In the North Atlantic, survival time in the water without a proper suit was measured in minutes. Men who reached lifeboats often drifted for days. Admiral Karl Dönitz developed wolfpack operations, coordinated attacks by groups of submarines on Allied convoys, striking simultaneously from multiple directions under darkness. A convoy that had evaded one submarine might find itself surrounded by 10. The losses during the first half of 1942, a period American sailors called the Second Happy Time, were catastrophic. The eventual defeat of the U-boat came through cracked German naval codes, improved radar, and long-range patrol aircraft that finally closed the mid-Atlantic gap. But the Battle of the Atlantic lasted the entirety of the war, from its first day to its last, making it the longest continuous military campaign of the Second World War. Number 6. The V2 rocket, the weapon no one heard coming. Every weapon before the V2 announced itself. Shells whistled, bombs shrieked, engines gave warning. The human nervous system had adapted to these signals over centuries of warfare. You heard the weapon, you took cover. The V2 arrived in silence. Developed at the Peenemünde Army Research Center under Werner von Braun, the Vergeltungswaffe II was the world's first operational ballistic missile. It stood 14 meters tall, weighed approximately 12,500 kilograms at launch and carried a warhead of roughly 1,000 kilograms of high explosive. It reached a maximum speed of 5,760 kilometers per hour, traveling through the upper atmosphere at altitudes of up to 88 kilometers before descending on its target. The explosion arrived before the sound of the rocket's approach. There was no warning. No siren had time to function. No alertness, no shelter decision, no individual action provided any protection. The first indication that a V2 had been fired at you was the blast. Between September 1944 and March 1945, Germany launched more than 3,000 V2 rockets at Britain, Belgium, and the Netherlands. More than 1,400 targeted Britain. The missiles killed approximately 3,000 British civilians. Civil defense authorities faced a problem with no precedent. Every previous form of aerial attack had allowed for warning systems. The V2 made warning systems irrelevant. After the war, von Braun was brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. He became the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that carried American astronauts to the moon in 1969. The same engineering that delivered silent destruction to London formed the foundation of humanity's first journey beyond Earth. The technology didn't change, only the direction. Number 5. The Tiger I tank, the machine that rewrote the rules of armor. In the autumn of 1942, Allied tank crews in Tunisia began filing reports that troubled their commanders. The German tank they were encountering could not be killed, not reliably, not at any practical combat range with the weapons they had. That tank was the Tiger I. First deployed on the Eastern Front in September 1942 near Leningrad, the Tiger I reached Tunisia in December 1942, where it engaged American M3 Lee tanks near Jadida. It weighed 57 tons and was protected by 100 millimeters of frontal armor. Its 88 millimeter KWK 36 main gun could destroy virtually any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Most Allied anti-tank weapons of 1942 and 1943 could not penetrate its frontal armor at practical combat distances. The problem the Tiger I created wasn't just firepower, it was doctrine. Allied armored tactics assumed a tank could be killed by another tank at realistic ranges. The Tiger I voided that assumption. Allied crews reported firing multiple rounds and watching them deflect before the Tiger traversed its turret and destroyed them with a single return shot. A condition known informally as Tiger fear, the tendency to identify any German armored vehicle as a Tiger, became so widespread that Allied intelligence officers issued specific guidance reminding units the Tiger I had exploitable weaknesses. Only 1,347 were ever produced against more than 49,000 Shermans. Germany lost the tank war through industrial arithmetic, but the Tiger I proved that the psychological weight a weapon carries can exceed its material impact. An army that believes it faces something it cannot kill is already partially defeated before the first shot is fired. Number 4. Napalm, the fire that couldn't be put out. In early 1942, in a top-secret laboratory in the basement of Harvard University's Converse Chemistry Building in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a team led by Professor Louis Fieser developed an incendiary compound unlike anything previously available. Combining aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate with gasoline produced a thick, adhesive gel, named napalm from its chemical components, that ignited on contact with air and burned at 800 to 1,200 degrees Celsius. Unlike conventional incendiaries, it stuck to everything it touched. On July 4th, 1942, Fieser's team tested the first napalm bomb on the Harvard soccer field. The results confirmed what laboratory tests had suggested. The United States Army Air Forces deployed napalm across Japan's cities in 1945 under General Curtis LeMay. On the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, Operation Meeting House, 334 B-29 Superfortresses dropped 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs, primarily M69 napalm bomblets, on Tokyo. The city was built largely of wood and paper. The resulting firestorm destroyed approximately 16 square miles. An estimated 80,000 to 100,000 people were killed in a single night, the most destructive conventional air raid in history. What distinguished napalm as a weapon of terror was what it meant for those caught in its path. Conventional fires can be escaped by moving away from the fuel source. Napalm converted the escape routes themselves into burning surfaces. The firestorms it created generated their own internal weather. Superheated air pulling everything toward the center rather than away. Fieser later said of his invention, "When we were developing napalm, we never thought of any anti-personnel use." The fire he started, in every sense, kept burning long after the war ended. Number 3. The Enigma and Ultra, the weapon that was never fired. In September 1939, as the war began, a 27-year-old Cambridge mathematician named Alan Turing arrived at Bletchley Park, a Victorian estate in Buckinghamshire, England. His assignment from the Government Code and Cipher School: break Enigma, the German military's electrical rotor cipher machine considered mathematically unbreakable, whose daily settings changed every 24 hours across hundreds of quintillions of possible configurations. Turing designed a machine that could test Enigma configurations mechanically at speeds no human team could match. Working with fellow Cambridge mathematician Gordon Welchman, whose invention of the diagonal board dramatically reduced false results, Turing developed the bomb. The first working version, called Victory, was installed at Bletchley in the spring of 1940. The resulting intelligence, codenamed Ultra, was classified for 30 years after the war, meaning virtually every historical account of Allied success written before 1974 was missing its most significant factor. Ultra allowed the Royal Navy to reroute convoys away from U-boat wolf packs. It gave commanders foreknowledge of German dispositions across North Africa and Europe. It confirmed before D-Day that German High Command still believed Normandy was a feint. Alan Turing, whose work historians credit with shortening the war by as much as 2 years, was prosecuted by the British government in 1952 for homosexuality. He was chemically castrated as a condition of avoiding prison and died in June 1954 at the age of 41. He received a royal pardon in 2013. The most important weapon of the Second World War was wielded by a man his own government destroyed. Number 2. The B-29, Superfortress. When the sky became the enemy. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was the most technically sophisticated aircraft the world had ever seen. A pressurized heavy bomber with a service ceiling of 31,850 feet, a combat range exceeding 3,200 miles, and a bomb capacity of up to 20,000 pounds, equipped with remote-controlled gun turrets operated by a fire control computer. It was also, in its early deployment, lethally unreliable. Its Wright R-3350 engines caught fire with alarming regularity during climb to altitude. Crews developed the grim understanding that their aircraft was nearly as dangerous as the enemy it was built to engage. None of that diminished what the B-29 ultimately delivered. Flying above the reach of most Japanese anti-aircraft guns, and at speeds contemporary interceptors struggled to match, the B-29 placed Japan's home islands under sustained bombardment for the first time in the war. Japan's wartime leadership had built their entire strategic narrative on the premise that the home islands were unreachable. The B-29 demolished that premise city by city, and then, on August 6, 1945, a single B-29 named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets of the 509th Composite Group, flew over Hiroshima and released one bomb. The aircraft that had spent a year proving hundreds of bombers could destroy a city delivered the final lesson. One aircraft, one bomb, one city. Number 1. The atomic bomb, the weapon that changed what war means. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 in the morning, in the Jornada del Muerto desert of New Mexico, the United States detonated the world's first nuclear weapon. The test was codenamed Trinity. J. Robert Oppenheimer, scientific director of the Manhattan Project, later recalled a line from Hindu scripture entering his mind as the fireball rose. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He was not being dramatic. He was being accurate. The Manhattan Project had mobilized 130,000 workers at its peak across more than 30 facilities in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, at a total cost of approximately $2 billion. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, codenamed Little Boy, a uranium gun-type device, detonated at 580 meters above the city with a yield equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The temperature at ground level exceeded 7,000 degrees Celsius within seconds. Between 70,000 and 80,000 people died instantly. By the end of 1945, the death toll from blast, fire, and radiation had risen to between 90,000 and 140,000. 3 days later, Fat Man destroyed Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. What makes the atomic bomb the most feared weapon in human history is not its death toll. It is what it revealed. The scientific principles that had been pursued as pure intellectual inquiry for decades, when weaponized, were sufficient to threaten not just a battle, not just a city, but civilization itself. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction that followed was not a military strategy. It was an acknowledgement that conventional strategic logic had been made obsolete. There was no winning a nuclear war. There was only managing the permanent absence of one. Oppenheimer spent the rest of his life arguing for nuclear arms control. In 1954, the government that built the bomb stripped him of his security clearance for doing so. The most destructive weapon in human history was built by men who immediately understood it should never be used again. We have spent the 80 years since in the hope that understanding holds. If this kept you watching, there's more where that came from. Click the like button and subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next.